Welcome to the Kitsap Publishing Deep Dive podcast with myself, Jack Bennett, and Emily Waters. Join us as we explore books, current events, history, politics, health, and more. Let's dive in.
So we're diving into Flame this time around.
Oh, excellent choice. I think everyone who's spent any time in the New York art scene, or really anyone who just appreciates a story with some fire in its belly, is going to get pulled right in.
And speaking of fire, right, Qwerty Blanc.
Yeah. There's a character you don't forget. He kind of embodies that whole scene, but also seems so separate from it.
Totally. I mean, we meet him at this swanky Hamptons party, right? Like
Yeah.
late 70s, peak art world success.
Champagne probably costs more than my car.
And he's miserable, utterly disillusioned. And it makes you wonder, how does someone get there? How do you go from, wherever you started to that?
And that's the genius of Flame. Ballard doesn't give us some straightforward biography. He drops us right into this moment of disillusionment, and then, flashback time, 1964. We meet Qwerty, or should I say Hank Smith, fresh off the bus from, get this, rural New York.
Okay.
Talk about a culture shock.
Talk about burying the lead, right. Rural New York to the heart of the 60s art scene. That's not a reinvention. That's like galaxy brain level transformation.
And the name change, I mean, you got to love this. Hank Smith becomes Qwerty Blanc.
Wait, like the keyboard.
The typewriter keyboard.
Like,
Flex it right off.
It's almost comical, but it also says so much about him. Like, I'm wiping the slate clean, starting fresh.
Exactly. And there's this playfulness to it, wouldn't you say? A refusal to take himself too seriously, which is interesting given how seriously everyone else seems to take the art world.
And he's landing right smack in the middle of Greenwich Village in the 60s. Talk about a time and a place.
It's like the energy of the entire universe was flowing through that neighborhood. And picture this. Young Hank, fresh off the bus, arrives at Penn Station.
Which, let's be honest, even in its heyday, wasn't exactly glamorous.
No, not at all. It was probably even worse in 64.
Oh.
Dilapidated, crowded. You can practically smell the grit and grime just reading Ballard's description.
It's such a far cry from the grand station he probably envisioned. Talk about a rude awakening.
Right. This little country mouse in the big city. But this is Qwerty, or Hank, whatever. He's got that fire in him. So he shakes off the dust, invents himself as Qwerty Blanc, and dives headfirst into this whole new world.
And that's where things get really interesting. He finds himself at this party, not just any party, right? We're talking Robert Rauschenberg's studio.
A converted church, no less.
Rauschenberg, the guy who erases de Kooning drawings, combines taxidermied goats and tires and calls it art.
The one and only. And apparently, there was a box turtle involved at this party.
A what?
A box turtle. Ballard mentions it in passing.
Of course he does. Only Rauschenberg, right? This is the guy who famously said, I've always wanted to work in a way that you can't tell it's just done by hand.
Which is hilarious given that he, literally erased a de Kooning drawing.
The art world, man, it's a trip. But anyway, Qwerty finds himself at this party at Rauschenberg's studio, surrounded by, the avant-garde elite.
It was the place to be if you were an artist, pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and here's Qwerty soaking it all in.
So he lands a job, right? At the Green Gallery.
Not as an artist at first.
Hey, really? How'd he get his foot in the door?
As the electrician.
No way! You can't make this stuff up.
Truth is often stranger than fiction. But, this being Qwerty, he uses it to his advantage.
And then Fire and Rain happens. Talk about a game changer.
Right? I mean, who would have thought a steaming woke could be art? But that's Qwerty for you, taking something ordinary and infusing it with this unexpected beauty.
That dripping water. It's like he's captured the essence of the city, this constant hum, this energy that never sleeps.
There's a rawness to it, a pliable energy that people connected with. It wasn't just a woke, it was a statement. Like, hey, look around you. There's beauty in the everyday and the overlooked.
It kind of reminds me of those early Warhol pieces,
Yeah.
Soup cans.
Totally. It's about elevating the mundane, challenging perceptions. And Qwerty's use of fire, that's a whole other layer. It's dangerous, it's unpredictable, it demands attention.
Like, this is me, deal with it.
Exactly. And it's around this time he meets Nomo, the filmmaker.
Ah, Nomo.
And
Now, there was a character. Always filming, documenting everything. They were like two peas in a pod.
A match made in, well, maybe not heaven, but definitely some back alley speakeasy where the drinks are strong and the conversation even stronger.
They're Free the Blue Crab's performance piece. Pure genius.
The image of Qwerty sprinting through Chinatown with this live crab, iconic. Ballard totally nails that scene.
It was hilarious, chaotic, and strangely profound all at the same time.
Like, what does it mean to free the blue crabs? Are we talking about literal crabs? Metaphorical crabs? Are we the crabs?
It's open to interpretation, but it definitely makes you think. And that's what made Qwerty so interesting. He wasn't just creating art, he was creating conversations. But then, like, a record scratch across this whole art scene montage, Vietnam.
Such a gut punch, right? Ballard doesn't ease us in, he just hits us with it. 1 minute, Qwerty's rubbing elbows with the art world darlings. The next, wham, draft notice.
It's like this stark reminder that the real world doesn't care how many blue crabs you've liberated or how much your latest woke installation is going for at the Green Gallery.
And it really throws Qwerty. I mean, this is a guy who's built his entire persona, his escape, around this idea of reinvention, right?
Shedding the skin of Hank Smith from the sticks and becoming, well, Qwerty Blanc, art star extraordinaire.
Exactly. And suddenly he's staring at this draft notice, this piece of paper that basically says, nope, you're still Hank Smith and Uncle Sam needs you. Talk about an identity crisis.
You really feel that tension in the novel, that internal struggle. Does he say, screw this, and hightail it to Canada like his buddy Bernie?
Bernie. Now, there's a whole other can of worms. Choosing to flee to Canada, to basically say, this isn't my fight, I'm out. It's a huge statement.
And you can see why Qwerty might envy that clarity, that conviction. Bernie's made his choice. He's living with it. Meanwhile, Qwerty's stuck in this limbo.
And he's got Adam to think about, too, his adoptive father.
Their relationship is so interesting. You don't get a ton about Adam, but those moments, those little glimpses into his life, powerful stuff.
He's this quiet presence, this grounding force for Qwerty. And when Adam opens up about his own experiences in Korea, man, it just rips your heart out.
It's like this whole other side of Adam that Qwerty never knew, this hidden pain, this trauma that he's carried for years. War does that, doesn't it? Leaves these invisible scars.
It makes you realize that everyone has a story, everyone's carrying something. And for Qwerty, hearing Adam's story, seeing the toll it's taken, it seems to tip the scales.
He enlists, not out of some gung-ho patriotic fervor, but almost out of respect for Adam, I think. Like, this is what you went through, this is my burden to bear now.
It's a heavy burden, and you can tell it changes him. Ballard doesn't dwell on the horrors of war, but you feel the weight of it on Qwerty's shoulders when he returns to New York.
SoHo's different, too. The energy's still there, but it's shifted somehow.
More commercialized. Slicker. Remember what Nomo says when Qwerty gets back? It's not about the art anymore, Qwerty. It's about the money.
And that's the last thing Qwerty needs to hear at that point. He's seen the worst of humanity, he's lost people, and now he's back in a world that feels shallow, meaningless. He's this acclaimed artist, right? Selling his stuff, making money, but you get the feeling it's all ashes in his mouth, like none of it matters anymore.
Success is a funny thing, isn't it? Especially in the art world. 1 minute you're starving for recognition, the next you're choking on it. And with Qwerty, Ballard really digs into that tension, that feeling of being trapped by your own success.
You can see it in his relationship with Gunther, his art dealer. Gunther's all about the bottom line, pushing Qwerty to churn out more work, bigger installations, anything to keep the money flowing.
And Qwerty sees right through it. He's been through the fire, literally and figuratively, and suddenly this whole art world charade, the pretentious gallery openings, the endless chatter about meaning and interpretation, it all just rings hollow.
So he goes back to his roots, reaches out to Bernie, who's living this quiet life in Canada, playing music, seemingly at peace with himself.
And it's in that reunion, I think, that Qwerty starts to find his way back from the brink. There's this unspoken understanding between them, this shared history that transcends all the choices they've made, good and bad.
It's like that line from the novel, sometimes you have to go back to where you came from to figure out where you're going.
Exactly. And for Qwerty, going back means more than just reconnecting with old friends. It's about rediscovering that inner spark, that thing that drew him to art in the first place, before it was about money and fame.
And then he meets Crow Dog. Talk about a curveball.
Ballard throws that in there, and it completely shifts the whole narrative, doesn't it?
1 minute, we're in the cynical, jaded world of the New York art scene. The next, we're in South Dakota, learning about Sioux traditions and the power of symbols from a medicine man.
And you think, okay, where's this going? But it totally works. Because it's through Crow Dog that Qwerty starts to understand there's more to life, more to art, than what he's been chasing all these years.
It's about connecting to something bigger than yourself, something ancient and true.
That scene with the star quilt, the one Crow Dog's wife gives to Qwerty, it's like this tangible representation of that connection, of the beauty and wisdom that exist outside the confines of the art world.
It's powerful stuff. And it leads Qwerty to make a pretty radical decision. He disappears, like vanishes off the face of the earth.
Which is the ultimate act of defiance, isn't it? He's rejecting everything the art world represents, reclaiming his own narrative.
Walking away from the fame, the fortune, the critics. It's like he's finally free.
And the really interesting thing is, he doesn't stop creating. We find out years later that his laser equinox project, this massive earthwork he'd only dreamed about, actually comes to fruition.
Beaming these laser lights across the North and South poles, connecting the entire planet through his art.
It's this beautiful, haunting image. Qwerty Blanc, the artist who seemingly disappeared, leaves behind a legacy that's both ephemeral and eternal.
It makes you think about what it really means to leave your mark on the world, doesn't it? Maybe it's not about the accolades or the money, but about the ideas you put out there, the connections you forge, the way you touch people's lives through your work. Qwerty leaves you with a lot to think about, that's for sure. Qwerty Blanc might be a fictional character, but his story, his struggles, his search for meaning, it feels deeply, undeniably human. And in a world that often seems obsessed with easy answers and quick fixes, maybe that's the most powerful message of all. So there you have it, folks. Another deep dive completed. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Kitsap Publishing Deep Dive Podcast. Emily Waters and I will see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.